Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to Professor Fitzpatrick for inviting me to speak today. When I got the call from Professor Fitzpatrick to actually speak here, I accepted, without any hesitation. And after I came to write this talk, I thought, well, what am I going to say? And it was really a trainee's perspective, and this is what I'm going to do today, and just give you a practical approach of how I started and how, where I'm ending up today. And a lot of the things I'm going to say have actually been covered within the discussions. And these are the steps that I follow when I'm writing a paper. Initially, I need to choose a topic. Then you need to choose the type of article which you're going to which you're going to write about. Then you choose the journal which you're going to submit to. Then you end up writing the article. You correct the article, and then you send the article. And we're going to go through each of these steps and ways of going about doing them. Choosing the topic is probably the most difficult step, especially if you're sort of an SHO starting a new job or an SPR starting a job or a researcher, because you probably don't know much about the topic. And it is very difficult, but I think that's once you get through that step, then things become easier. Ways of going about it is asking different people, asking your supervisor, your colleagues, knowing what's in the literature, and then looking at it. Once you find the topic, you do a literature search, and there's different ways of doing literature searches. You can go into PubMed. It's probably the most common literature search engine, but you can go into Google Scholar. There's something called Scopus, which has been advertised quite heavily in certain journals. Choosing the art, once you've done the literature search, try to choose something which is interesting, not only for the readers, but also for you. Because if you're not interested, say, your interest is prostate cancer, or and then you end up writing something about incontinence, you may not give it exactly the same sort of flavor as if you're writing something which is very interesting to you. It has to be original, something that hasn't been done before, because you can always write about things. A lot of the review articles have already been published before, and certainly, as Professor Fitzpatrick, I think, said, you can write up the same article, or sorry, Professor Kirby mentioned, you could be asked to write a review article on, say, prostate cancer, and once you write it 3 or 4 times, you have difficulty in writing a similar review article. So try to find something which is original. And as I said, get advices from your supervisors, from your colleagues, and from your consultants. This is just sort of from Scopus, basically, and it's quite a good. I only sort of started using it a few months ago, and it gives you a lot of things about people who've published, and you can see how many documents they've published. It's quite good and similar to Medline, but it summarizes things. So what are the type of articles you can write? Well, letters to the editor, they're probably the easiest. And my first paper was a letter to the British Medical Journal, and I was really upset because it didn't get into the mainstream British Medical Journal. It got into the electronic British Medical Journal, which was when I was in SHO. So, start with a letter to the editor. Pick up an article you're interested in, and then just write something about it. Speak to your consultant or your colleagues, and write something about it and send it to the editor. Case reports. Any interesting cases you come across is probably worth writing, and there's lots of journals which you can submit. And there's now something called cases journals, and all they accept is case reports. And the British Medical Journal, British Journal of Surgery and Medicine in urology sort of accepts case reports. So that's another thing to write about. Editorials are probably difficult because it's normally written by the editors. Review articles, they're usually invited, but there's no reason why you can't write to an editor and say, I would be interested in writing this review article, this is the plan, would you be interested? But you're usually invited articles by the editors to authors. And original papers, you have to do the research really to do the original papers. Whether it's a small study or a big randomized control study, that will give you the original papers. Where to submit? Factors to consider. I've put impact factor because that's the thing that I was sort of most obsessed with when I started writing papers, is what is the impact factor. But the more you write, the more you realize that impact factor is probably the least important, because there's a lot of factors that influence it, and I think that's been covered already. The audience, I mean, if you're writing a urology paper, you probably want to send it to a urology journal, unless it's something that you want everyone, like send it to the New England Journal of Medicine if it's something of very important. The prestige of the journal, that sort of links into the impact factor, but that you could consider that. Author's preference, if you're writing, if your supervisor, for example, has written to a journal and has been writing to a journal and publishing there, then they may publish your work more preferentially than other journals. Whether it's indexed on Medline, not all journals are indexed on Medline. I mean, one of my papers in Journal of Pediatric Urology, that was it's not on Medline, but they do get on Medline 5 years down the line once they've got the impact factor and the publications and citations. So it may come on later on, but Medline is not the only search engine, as I mentioned. So be flexible. Journal reply time, maybe that would influence. If you're trying to apply for a job and suddenly you've got two weeks for the interview and you want to reply within a week to see whether your article is published, to put it on your CV, then you may want to consider that. Anonymity, that's very important. I mean, I've sort of reviewed for some journals, and you get the author's name, and that sometimes actually biases reviewers. So that you may need to look into that and see whether your journal is going to be, your paper is going to be anonymous when it's going to be reviewed or not. Frequency of publication. So the BJUI is published twice a month, which is may influence that you want things to be published more soon. We've been through that, I think. The questions you want to answer before writing is really, what do you want to say? What's your message? Is it worth saying? I mean, has it been said before and you're just repeating it again? What is the right format? You need to know how you're going to present it. And I think that's been discussed already with the IMRAD classification. Who's the audience? We've discussed that as well. What is the right journal? As well, that's been discussed. So once you decided on all that, you start to write the article. And how to begin, that's very difficult. Different people will advise you to write different things. Some people say start with the introduction. Some people say start with the results. I think whatever you're flexible with, that's where you want to begin.